Hey guys, so we are on chapter 12. We're going to see how we do. We might read 2 chapters. We'll just see how it goes. Invasion of the Killer Bees. Pearl slept so deeply she barely moved, but she dreamed. Mostly of fairies, pretty little things that danced in the air and made music with their wings. They invited her to a tea party where she sat on a gumdrop stool and ate sugar crystals from a tiny buttercup bowl. Wouldn't that be fun? The fairies smiled sweetly at her. They offered her more sugar and put flowers in her hair. But then, just as Pearl was about to grow her own wings and start flying, the fairies began biting her all over. And they began to wail in a strange way. Wailing and biting, wailing and biting. Pearl bolted upright, waving her arms to ward off the attacking beast. But as the fog of sleep faded, she realized it had only been a dream. She was safe in her room, no biting. But the wailing sound was coming from outside. Pearl scrambled out of bed and threw back the curtains. Sunlight nearly blinded her. It's the middle of the day, she realized as she opened her bedroom window. The wailing sound grew louder. She leaned out to get a better view. A police car drove down Main Street, its siren blaring, and stopped outside the Buttonville Cinema. Pearl's aunt, Officer Millie, got out of the squad car and ran into the theater. Pearl glanced at her bedside clock. 4:10 p.m. The special matinee of Invasion of the Killer Bees would be playing. Pearl! Ben stood on the sidewalk below. What's going on? Pearl called down to him. I don't know, he yelled. I was sleeping and the siren woke me up. I'll be right down. Ben had changed out of his pajamas, and even though Pearl didn't want to miss a moment of excitement, she grabbed a pair of basketball shorts and a t-shirt from her dresser. Why was her aunt at the movie theater? And why had her parents let her sleep so long? She had work to do. She had fairies to catch. By the time she dressed and ran downstairs, Mr. and Mrs. Petal were standing on the sidewalk next to Ben. They both wore their dollar store aprons. Hello, sweetie, Mrs. Petal said. How was your nap? Fine. Pearl looked down the street. Although the siren had stopped, the red light on the police car was still flashing. What's Aunt Millie doing? There's been some sort of a disturbance at the cinema, Mr. Petal said. We heard screaming. Maybe the movie is too scary, Mrs. Petal suggested. The cinema's front door flew open and Mr. Bumfrickle hobbled out, moving as fast as his arthritic legs could carry him. Killer bees! He hollered, a wild look on his face. He was followed by Maybelle, a frequent visitor at the senior center. As she bounded down the stairs, she spilled her jumbo-sized tub of popcorn. Out of my way! Mr. Dill and Mrs. Dill raced out the door, as did Mr. Filbert. We've been stung! And then came Ben's grandfather. He raised his cane in the air and hurried, Oh, Gewalt! We're under attack! I think you're right, Mr. Petal told his wife. That movie is definitely too scary. Pearl pulled Ben aside. There's a lot of sugar in a movie theater, she whispered. He nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Pearl was about to suggest that they get some jelly beans, jars, and butterfly nets from the dollar store when they suddenly saw red. What would have red on it? Victoria Mulberry and her mother, wearing their red overalls and red baseball caps, barreled out of the cinema's door and pushed past the elderly patrons. My daughter's been stung! She's allergic to bees! Call an ambulance! Call the National Guard! Mrs. Mulberry explained. Victoria, looking a bit dazed, rubbed both her earlobes. Uh-oh, Pearl said. Just a few weeks ago, Victoria had caught troll tonsillitis, and her entire head had swelled up like a balloon. If she was allergic to fairy bites, then her eyeballs would start to itch, and who knew what else might happen. Pearl and Ben would have to run and get an anti-venom shot from Mr. Tabby. What a nuisance that would be. Mom, I'm not having an allergic reaction, Victoria said. I'm fine. I must not be allergic to killer bees. Mrs. Mulberry examined her daughter's earlobes. Well, I still think we should call for help. This could be a matter of national security. Does anyone have the telephone number for the president? While Victoria and her mother argued about what should be done, who should be called, Pearl nudged Ben with her elbow. Let's go see if we can find the fairies, she said. Okay. Sweetie, I don't want you watching that movie, Mrs. Petal called as Pearl and Ben dashed across the street. It will give you nightmares. But they didn't stop running. They passed Grandpa Abe. They passed Maybelle and Mr. Bumfrickle. They didn't even glance at the Mulberries as they bounded up the stairs and into the cinema. Pearl, Ben, stay back. Officer Miller leaped in front of the kids, blocking them with her arms. It's too dangerous in there. Get outside. Pearl peered over and under her aunt's arm, trying to get a full view of the lobby. Miss Wortwell, who sold the movie tickets and refreshments, was cowering behind the popcorn machine. Shredded candy boxes lay on the floor and all over the counter, as if they'd been torn by 100 tiny hands and teeth. Which, as Pearl and Ben knew, was exactly what had happened. Help! Miss Wortwell said in a small, timid voice. The killer bees are going to eat me. Help me, please. She pointed to a churning cloud that was attacking a box of caramel corn. Don't worry, Marilyn. We'll get you out of here, Officer Millie told her. Walk slowly toward me. Walk over here to the door. Come on. It was like trying to coax a cat into a bathtub. Miss Wortwell wasn't going anywhere. Pearl wasn't worried about Miss Wortwell. The fairies wouldn't eat her, but they sure had made a mess, and now that the police department was involved, catching the fairies in secret was going to be difficult. The swarm, having finished the caramel corn, swooped around and round, high-pitched whining, bouncing off the lobby walls. Tawanabeth, Pearl called. Tawanabeth, stop doing this. You're scaring everyone. Who's Tawanabeth? Officer Millie said. Then she yelled, Duck! With a swoosh, the swarm flew over their heads and out the lobby door. Pearl and Ben turned on their heels and ran outside. In a matter of minutes, Buttonville had transformed from a sleepy little town into a hub of chaos. Such mayhem hadn't been seen in the town since the great water break in '79, when the streets had flooded so quickly people had to swim to safety. Onlookers screamed and pointed to the humming swarm. A car honked, another crashed into a street lamp. The fairies flew through the diner's open window. More screaming arose as Lucy and Lionel rushed out. Help! They both cried. The gathering crowd watched through the picture windows as the fairies turned bottles upside down and poured syrup all over the counter. The syrup was lapped up almost instantaneously, and the swarm was on the move again, heading into the Food for Less market. The Food for Less cashier ran out. Help! Help! There are bugs in the store! Pearl and Ben ran to the window, and sure enough, the fairies were tearing into bags of brown sugar. Unbelievable, Ben said. How much sugar can those things eat? What are we going to do? Pearl asked. This is terrible. Attention, everyone! Officer Millie stood on the roof of her squad car, a megaphone in her hand. Attention! People stopped screaming and turned to listen. It's important that we don't panic. Clearly, we've been invaded by some sort of insect. We don't know what kind exactly or why. They followed their queen, Miss Bee said. She stepped out of the crowd. Yesterday morning, the queen bee was inside the diner. Pearl Petal caught her. I advised Pearl to get rid of her, but if she didn't, and if the queen has begun to nest, then that would explain why the swarm has arrived. I knew Pearl had something to do with this, Mrs. Mulberry said. Why else would we have a swarm of killer bees on the loose in Buttonville? Pearl is always causing trouble. Pearl? Officer Miller looked around. Where are you? Pearl gulped. The crowd parted down the middle, making room for her. She walked up to the squad car. From the squinty glares being cast her way, she knew she'd already been judged guilty as charged. Her aunt peered over the top of her dark glasses. Pearl, is this true? It's true, Victoria said, in her usual tattletale way. Victoria was more than happy to provide information regarding Pearl's activities. She told me that she caught a queen killer bee. She even showed it to me. Did you get rid of it? Miss B asked. Pearl looked around for Ben. She could certainly use one of his stories right about now, but the crowd had squeezed closer and she couldn't see him. At that moment, she felt very alone. She'd faced lots of complicated situations during the last month, but Ben had always been there for her. I didn't get rid of it. Exactly. The squad car began to rock back and forth as Mrs. Mulberry heaved herself onto the trunk, then climbed under the roof. She grabbed the megaphone from Officer Millie's hand. Have no fear, fellow Buttonvillers. As the president of the Welcome Wagon Committee, I take the safety of our citizens as my top priority. While Pearl has brought trouble yet again to our peaceful town, the Mulberrys are here to save the day. She pointed at Victoria, who held up a piece of paper. My daughter found a flyer for an exterminator. We called them, and they're on their way. Exterminator? Pearl cried. All right, chapter 13, Shelter for $1.